Hello, everybody, and welcome to this latest in the Values Jam guest session series. And Sally, it's brilliant to have you here. So to start with, please introduce yourself and tell us about the great work that you do.
Thank you so much, Alan. It's such a joy to be here. I'm so fascinated by what you've created and very excited to see what unfolds in the next hour or so. Just a very little snippet for anybody watching that doesn't know me. My background is in holistic health and preventative health. So health now has sort of gone from physiological health all the way through biochemistry, psychology, metaphysical health, and I now look at the whole gamut of health, including financial health, societal health, really all aspects of health. So from a very holistic perspective, and I find myself working in the sphere of education with young people and parents and educators in various different capacities. So I had the opportunity about 3 years ago when we lived in Bali to create some programs for the students at the Green School in Bali. So I went in and asked lots of questions and created something in collaboration with the students. And out of that came my programs and a book that I've written to really address the next steps for kids, to look at equipping them with what they need when they step out of the familiarity of the school gates. So my book is called Figuring Out Your Future. It's written in nice bite-sized chunks for teenagers and their parents. There's a curriculum that accompanies the book that's available for educators. I also have a card game, which is, I love, we both created our own sort of version of a card game or program. This one is called Ripples of Impact, and it's about really creating safe spaces of possibility for young people, although all ages tell me this is fantastic, places for them to be really seen and heard, places for them to be held and learn to express themselves. And the questions cover a whole gamut of things, but are very much directed to people who are trying to work out their next steps in life and understand what's
it's great that there are so many parallels, like the card game, and you have this very collaborative approach to design rather than, you designing it and then foisting it on other people. So it's just, there's such a cool alignment there. And I'm fascinated to see what card's going to come out today. So let's choose one. I'm going to just tip out the cards from the deck. How many piles would you like me to create here?
Let's have 4 piles.
4 piles, okay. And would you like...
Born on the 4th of July, so number 4 is always a great number for me.
And so piles 1 to 4, which would
Pile 4.
Pile 4.
Pile 4.
And, well, this is really weird. We've got 4 cards.
Oh, okay. 4th card.
Now, there you go.
Beauty. Oh, wow.
Beauty. So, what does beauty mean? And what does it look, feel, and sound like?
Oh, this is a great question. Love this. I wasn't expecting beauty, but it's a cool one. Beauty. Well, we all know the saying, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and you can't really discuss beauty without bringing that into the conversation, I think. So beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I guess the question is it really? I love to question the assumptions and the programming that we all have, and the catchphrases that we've all adopted in society as being the way that it is. And they're assumptions that I like to call mass assumptions, because they're assumptions that are adopted by the masses as normal and accepted and almost truth. Whereas, I really think that the more you dig into truth, the more you have to question, is there an absolute truth, or is it just that it's all perspective, you know? So maybe there are no truths, maybe there are only perspectives. I think that's a quote from somebody at some point in time that I've stolen. So I wonder, with beauty, is it in the eye of the beholder, or is there something that we consider to be universally beautiful? And
it's a great question, isn't it? Because I agree with you. I think that you know, whilst the phrase "beauty is in the eye of the beholder," there is also a general acceptance of some things that are universally regarded as beautiful, right? So that seems to be a contradiction. But then, for instance, I'm thinking of a parent with their newborn baby, and to them, that baby is beautiful, but to some other people it might not be the most beautiful baby they've ever seen. And so that example actually is strongly in my mind, about that contrast between the beholder and this kind of more universal view. The other thing that comes to mind about beauty is beauty confined to vision and the visual aspect, or is it more broad than that? Because I feel that when I think about beauty initially, I tend to start with visual beauty quite strongly, and then only afterwards do I start to think about other things being beautiful in different ways. How's that for you?
Oh, you've packed a lot into that little bit of the conversation. Yes, I think we tend to, in our society, focus on visual before we focus on anything else. It's probably the strongest sense for most people. Not everybody, obviously, but I think it's a big focus. And in our Western society, that's you know, dominated by social media and images bombarding us 24/7, I think visual is definitely the first aspect of beauty that you think about. But obviously it's far deeper than that. I like that, you know, going back to that, the beauty and the beholder, it's the participatory aspect that creates something to be beautiful or not for you. You know, and the entanglement. And I won't get into talking about particles and waves too early on in the discussion because I like going down those rabbit holes. But, you know, the participation and the engagement that we have in life is what we get back from it. I always think that, you know, so my perspective of something that's beautiful is different to your perspective because of your experience and your engagement and your interpretation of something. And even the example of the baby, you know, when I'm thinking about my children, of course, I thought they were beautiful when they were born, but there were moments when I didn't think they were beautiful, when they were screaming or when I had lack of sleep, you know. And I feel like we tend to think of beauty as being utopic and perfect.
Yeah.
And I think that I wonder if, you know, that skews the definition of beauty because of our sort of obsession with the visual side of beauty and what has become acceptable as being beautiful in our culture and our society. And
you're taking me towards universal perfection as being kind of an association with what people tend to think of as beauty, you know. So it's like that person, let's say, whereas I'm also thinking about when you have an experience, and I really enjoyed what you were saying there about people being involved together, and you can, you know, I can think of people saying, oh, that was just a beautiful moment or a beautiful experience. And that is wholly different than this concept of visual beauty. There's
Yeah.
something really, really different about that.
Yeah.
So what's that about?
Maybe that's how that makes you feel.
Mm.
Because
sorry, the other thing, just before I forget, you were talking about visual being a strong sense. Well, smell is also a strong sense. And when you said that, I remember thinking, and what about smell? And I used to work in the hospitality sector, and I worked with a top chef. We got a Michelin star when we worked together, and he cooked the most fantastic truffle potatoes. And I can
oh wow.
still smell that now. And it was a truly beautiful smell.
Mm.
Sorry, I just wanted to share that before I forgot it. So what about
Oh, I love that. Gosh, well, it's very wintry here tonight. I would love to have some truffle potato. But I agree, it's not necessarily tangible, or like a smell is non-tangible, even though the potato is obviously tangible. The smell that it, and the memory that it evokes, because you can have a beautiful relationship
yeah,
or a beautiful memory,
yeah,
and that is something that's full of beauty.
yeah,
So it's a really interesting word because of that connotation, that it isn't only limited to, sort of material objects that we
yeah,
typically sort of think of when we first think of beauty. We
yeah,
tend to think of, a beautiful flower or a beautiful woman or a beautiful scenery outside or something like that, in nature. But I think it's far deeper than that, of
mm.
course, far more far-reaching.
And there's also something about the level in some way, because I'm thinking about, we were talking about experiences earlier, and you can imagine saying, oh yeah, that was a beautiful experience. But think about the other adjectives that we use to describe an experience. So we might say it was an inspirational experience or an exciting experience. Now, neither of those would be adequate to describe something that was a beautiful experience. There's something calmer, something maybe deeper, actually, more emotion, not more emotional, just different emotion, maybe. But it strikes me as a more profound word, actually, beautiful. It's got something deeper than surface level excitement, for instance.
Yeah, I can very much relate to that. I think the emotive feeling that you get when you talk about beauty is much more profound than just something that's pretty
Yeah,
or
yeah,
nice or pleasant. I think beauty is, maybe it describes the essence of something.
yeah,
When I think about when I use the word beautiful, yeah, I feel like, and I do tend to choose my words, not always, but I tend to, if I'm going to describe something or somebody as beautiful, I think it's because of the meaning that it gives me.
yeah,
Because if it is going back to the, beauty's in the eye of the beholder, it's because it's beautiful to me. It doesn't have to be universally beautiful to everybody else, but
mhm,
it's the impact that it's had on me in the interaction that has evoked me to think that it was beautiful.
yeah. And there's something about
Does
the
that make sense to you?
it does absolutely, and you've opened something about the. I think beautiful is something deeply personal, actually. And so this is a contradiction to the universal version of beauty. And I'm thinking of, okay, so I'll just share with you the moment that my first daughter was born. So, never been in that situation before. And when she was born, it was a truly beautiful moment when I felt kind of excited giddy, happy, just a real cocktail of emotions. And I remember holding her and her little hand around my thumb. And I was just like, this is amazing. Now, that was a truly beautiful moment. And I think what we're touching on here is that beauty is, it invokes something deeply personal, or can do. Maybe it doesn't all the time.
Yeah, well, I think it definitely, can.
Go on.
I think it's one of those words like joy. I think that it's talk about being happy. Happy is a very fleeting emotion that comes and goes, but joy is a deeper seated feeling that's somehow related. I think, like I think about how you're describing your daughter and that experience, that would be joy, but not sort of an elated emotion of joy necessarily, but a profoundly deep feeling of not even satisfaction. It's hard to describe that moment because I've had that with when my kids were born, and yet there are people I know that find childbirth horrific and messy and unappealing.
Yeah.
And they don't, they're freaked out by babies, and so it wouldn't be the same thing to them. They'd be thinking, oh, clean it up. Yeah, for me, that's quite strange. And it just highlights how unique we all are and how the things that matter and bring each of us meaning are so different and so varied. And so, being able to identify what is beautiful for each of us is quite interesting.
Yeah. And when you were talking about joy, I was kind of thinking about the difference between, because I think you're right, joy is kind of more long lasting than a moment of happiness, for instance. But the word that came to mind thinking about beauty was something around cherish. You cherish something that is beautiful, which so what does cherish mean? It means you attach a lot of importance and value to it, and you appreciate it deeply. But then not always.
I would say,
You would say what?
To cherish something, to hold it dear to you, to hold something dear, not in terms of holding tightly, but just to, appreciate that moment or that person or that experience.
Yeah. So what about
to me, the deep gratitude.
Let's challenge.
I'm just saying, I think there's deep gratitude associated with it. Don't you feel like there's somehow joy and gratitude is associated with beauty?
Yeah. And I think in the context of where we're going with this conversation, I think that's absolutely right. But I'm going to kind of throw a spanner in the works now, if I might. So
yes, please do.
So imagine, let's be stereotypical. So imagine a beautiful woman who is not a very nice person. So I think people would look at her and say, yeah, she's beautiful. But that's not about cherishing her. It's not about, having this deep association. It's kind of this just, it's an acknowledgement of that visual characteristic. So does that contradict what we've been talking about for the last 5 minutes?
No, because I think you would have to say what constitutes her being beautiful.
Okay.
Why have we described her as being beautiful based on her appearance?
So is
that back to what we think is socially acceptable?
Yeah.
What we're all meant to look like. And the mold that we're all meant to fit into, that You know, if you get the typical stereotypical thing is, you know, once you get old and wrinkly, you're no longer appealing to be in Hollywood, or, you know, a newsreader on the TV or a presenter. You know, typically they're wanting a certain age group and a certain body shape and, you know, all of that sort of criteria. Is that beautiful? I don't know. Maybe for some people that is beautiful. You know, like some people might find Kim Kardashian beautiful. Other people might not. And I think it's to say that there's no right or wrong. And somebody can be externally look beautiful, you're right, but not be quite so beautiful on the inside. And that's a judgment as well, you know, because I think if we, who are we to say that someone's not beautiful as well as they are beautiful?
Yeah. And what's the, so you made me ask another question, actually. So the difference between attractive and beautiful. So beautiful seems to be a bit attractive seems to be more superficial, actually. Or does it?
Well, attractive is definitely a very individual, because I think we could probably, most people could probably agree that, you know, things like a butterfly emerging out of a chrysalis is quite a beautiful thing to see and witness.
Yeah.
Or a baby being born, or a little calf getting up off the ground for the first time. Yeah. Or the sun going down over the ocean. And, you know, I mean, nature scenes. You know, I suppose if you're looking for what's universally beautiful, you'd watch a David Attenborough movie, or, you know, something, and see amazing nature scenes unfolding. And I'm sure many people would find those things beautiful. And are they attractive? Well, I guess we're attracted to them. But then when you're talking about people, who we're attracted to is deep. It is, I think, visually is a big part of it, but I think it's definitely, well, of course, it's deeper than that. There's many layers to beauty.
Yeah, I think that's crystallized it, if you'll excuse the pun, for me. So your example of the butterfly, so that is beautiful. It is more than visually attractive because of what's happening there. You know, and the transition from one stage to another, and your appreciation of not just what you're seeing, but what is happening there. And similarly with a sunrise or a sunset, it's not just what you're seeing, it's you processing what is actually happening. You know, it's the beginning of a new day or the end of a day, which is more than what you're seeing. So I think what's coming through here for me is that beauty is is a lot deeper than what you experience on the surface, and it's what's the story underneath it that creates part of the beauty as well.
Yeah, well, I think that we can't separate our visual experience from our visceral, energetic feeling.
Yeah,
it's all entwined. You know, it's very difficult to say, oh, that's a beautiful thing because it looks beautiful. It's how it makes you feel. And you know, I often go back to the spaces that I create, because, as you know, I wear two hats, and I married an architect, so somehow by default I've fallen into doing interior design, which was a childhood dream. So I now have this one hat that I wear where I get to create beautiful spaces. And funny enough, in the other hat that I wear, where I'm mentoring young people and speaking to parents, I also get to create beautiful spaces where those people feel safe enough to speak up. They feel safe enough to start exploring themselves. They feel safe enough to share with me and interact together. And to me, they're both beautiful spaces to create.
Yeah.
And I feel so blessed in my life that I have this thread that runs through what I do. And it took me a long time to connect the dots on those two things. I used to think, I do these two wildly different things, and how is that even possible? You know, what do I tell people when they ask me what I do? How is it okay? I beat myself up for a very long time that I wasn't just one specialist in one area doing one thing for my whole life, because I've had such an unorthodox path, and life doesn't happen in a straight line.
Yeah.
And for me, it was a very wiggly line, a jagged line, and it's been phenomenal, and I wouldn't change a thing. And looking back, I connect the dots through all of that. And what brings the greatest fulfillment now in my life is creating these beautiful spaces. And they're equally important. You know, I think sometimes we can look in with our sort of skewed judgment and think it's more important to deal with deep issues of people's lives than it is to, you know, pick cushion colors and paint colors and create beautiful environments. But I actually think that there's just as much importance on each, if that matters to you.
Yeah. And so just thinking about those built environments that you create, can I ask you to consider two different projects that you've been involved in? One where you say, that was beautiful, and the other where you say, it was good, but wasn't the beautiful bit. Can you think of two projects that might fit those bills?
That's a great question, Alan. Actually, I think time has a lot to do with this.
Okay.
So at the time, when I think back to one of the very first little projects we did years ago, at the time, I thought it was beautiful. Now I look back at it 25 years later and I think, oh, what on earth was I thinking to put in a red feature wall with a palm in front of it? And you know, at the time, I'm sure it was highly fashionable and quite the in thing. But it also shows how it was my taste determined whether I thought it was beautiful or not. There also was another project that I did for a client. Actually, one of our homes was in a magazine, and people used to contact us and ask us to do jobs. And I did a job for one of these clients in East Melbourne, and she obviously saw the magazine and saw my taste and said, "Oh, I love it. Can you come and do my house?" And which I went to their place, and she said, "Oh, but I want to keep the red carpet and the turquoise wall, and we don't have enough money to change the light fittings." And so I had to do a very compromised job, which was not how I like to work, and actually showed me that that's not what I want to do for my full-time job and work for other people and compromise what I love doing. So I've been very, very grateful to have done all of our own work and been able to be, I suppose, very selfish and, free to design very much what's in my head and my heart. And so it's an interesting question to compare the two. I mean, I don't think I've ever created anything super ugly, but that's only my perspective.
But I think
other people might not appeal to other people.
The time dimension, I think, is another important point here, because I've just written down that beauty is something about in the moment, So, you know, what you've described is it was beautiful for you then, but now you look back on it and it's not. So there's something about, and we've talked about that beautiful moment. We talked about, you know, the newborn baby. That's a moment, and then there's this personal connection thing. So, like you were just saying, that's your perspective, and then there's this emotional reaction beyond the appreciation, you know, the visual appreciation or the appreciation of a smell. It's more about I feel something physical, of a physical reaction. um all right, well, let's move on and let's choose another question. um okay, so you mentioned I don't think I've produced anything ugly, so where have you noticed a lack of beauty?
Lack of beauty. Probably in this little rental house that we're in at the moment. I'm in very temporary place to live, which is really strange for me. I'm in a complete state of flux this year with various unexpected things having happened, and which has opened up amazing possibilities. So we are doing some incredibly fun projects. But in the meantime, it's required that things took a lot longer. We're building a house up on the tropical island of Hamilton Island in the Barrier Reef, which, in my opinion, will be very beautiful. We'll be looking out at the sunset over all the islands and the ocean. So that will be beautiful. It's taken a year and a half longer than was intended. And so in the meantime, we're doing other things. But yeah, my environment is very important to me. Where I live and work and exist, it's incredibly important to me. And I've been incredibly blessed in my life to have lived in some really stunning places and had a husband that has designed homes for me, that I get to then live and work and breathe and be in those environments. So I feel, you know, and one of the things on the brief is always the kitchen has to look out over the sunset, because when I'm cooking dinner, I don't want to miss the sunset. And so most of the time we have big sky and I get to watch the sun going down, which is one of my very favorite things to do. And it feels like a very indulgent thing if you've got other things and, you know, kids to feed and all those things going on. So yeah, right now, this is very functional and it's great. And I'm very grateful that we found it in a housing crisis where there's no, you know, availability. You know, it's great to be here. But yeah, it's temporary, so it's fine. But it is interesting how your environment, or how my environment impacts me.
Okay.
And I've had to cultivate little spaces within this very functional space, because I don't see sunset. I can walk outside and, you know, 5 minutes away, I'm at the river watching the sun go down over the city, which is quite lovely to do, but I don't always have time to do that. And so, yeah, within that, I have found little spaces that I've got, you know, that work for me. But I'm also working towards the other projects. And so, you know, I think it definitely comes back to being in the moment, like you talked about, and how things make you feel.
Mm-hmm.
And this brings me to one of my favorite quotes, a Charlie Chaplin quote from the 1940s just popped into my head. We think too much and we feel too little.
Absolutely right. And for me, the lack of beauty, what comes to my mind is kind of modern cities, or urban environments actually, that are kind of out of control, and, you know, just loads of stuff being built without seemingly very much consideration at all. And actually, so this happens in Values Jam quite a lot. People talk about how during a Values Jam, they're reminded of a memory or an event that happened quite some time ago and that maybe hasn't crossed their mind for a long time, and it's just happened to me. So thinking about the urban environment, I remember, actually it's Lucy, my first daughter again, when she was 13, she came to visit me for one of these be at work days. When you're at school, you spend a day in the work environment. And so I was working in the city of London. I don't know if you're familiar with the geography of London, but quite near Liverpool Street. So really central London. And so she spent the day with me. And on the way out, I said to her, oh, sorry. And we lived around about 20 miles out of London in a kind of quite suburban environment. And so it was her first time really to be in a big city like that. And on the way out of the door of the office, I just said to her, so what do you think of London? And she said, it smells, you can't see the sky, and everybody's in a hurry.
Wow. Out of the mouth of babes.
And it's like, whoa. So I think of that unplanned, undesigned, unconsidered urban sprawl as lacking in beauty. Now, that's not to say that cities can't be beautiful, because I think some cities are truly beautiful and parts of London are truly beautiful. But I enjoy nature, and you talked about sunsets. And I think that nature is just something that I want/need, and I'm a bit jealous of you, because I've been talking recently about, if I move again, which I think I might like to do, the box to tick is to be in natural beauty, because like you just said, if you're living every day, why would you not want to be somewhere where you want to be rather than being somewhere else and striving to be somewhere where you want to be, kind of thing.
Yeah, like a lot of people live like that. I remember I worked in a pub in England. I was born in the UK, and I worked in a pub when I was 17, probably illegally. But anyway, I remember people coming in to the pub, and it left such a deep impression on me. They came in, sat at the same table, drank the same pint of beer, had the same conversation with the same friends. And I was just about to embark on my gap year, and I was saving up to travel. And I remember these same people, they came, same parking spot, same table. If somebody was in their table, they'd be really upset.
Yeah.
And they would discuss their holiday. For 6 months of the year, they would discuss where they were going. They'd then go on their 2 weeks on holidays, and then they would talk about it for 6 months. I was mind blown to me that this was how people lived. And I thought, wow, I really don't want to have to look forward my whole life to my 2 weeks, my whole year to my 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I want to live my life as if every day is a holiday.
Yeah.
Not because I'm lying around doing nothing, but because I get up and I'm excited to have my day. So really, it set me on a journey, just observing these people in the pub all those years ago. It set me on a journey to really choose to engage in life and to squeeze the most I could out of every day. And I think I sort of made that decision probably subconsciously, and it's how I live. It's how I've lived for years and years. And you're reminded of it when you lose dear friends, or, things happen and you think, oh, I've really got to squeeze as much out of my life as I can. I'm here for, who knows how long we're all here for. And so it's given me that very sort of glass half full attitude, I suppose, to life. And this conversation is really interesting because it's bringing me and I love beauty. I think for me, it's important to be surrounded by what I think is beautiful, and I choose beautiful objects and things to put in my home, and beautiful artwork. And I am incredibly blessed to be able to choose where I live. Not everybody has that opportunity. Some people really can't choose that.
Yeah.
I lived in Indonesia for 3 years, and the rice farmers who were outside my window farming every day in the rice fields, they don't have that luxury of choice. And so it's so interesting to be immersed in different cultures and to see from a different perspective what's beautiful to them, and what's beautiful to different people, and to appreciate what that is. And I think having lived in different countries has helped me to appreciate the really simple things now. Even though, I love having beautiful things, I think it becomes easier to find beauty in nature because it's abundant. It's probably not so easy when you're in a sprawling city. But it brought to mind when I traveled to Africa, and you're in the slums of Africa and the shanty towns, same as India, and there is something inherently beautiful in those places, even though you could look at that and think it's squalor, and like your daughter says quite rightly, it smells and you can't see the sky. There's congestion and smog and rushing people banging into each other, not caring about anyone, and pushing on the tube, and all of that sort of thing. And it's almost like it doesn't bring out the best in us to squash us into those environments. And the studies that are done on environments that people live in, there's a lot of data that to suggest that piling people on top of each other in high rises and in the lockdowns during the pandemic, it was even more evident to see what happens. It's not ideal for how human beings are wired, and we've distanced ourselves from nature. We've separated ourselves out and created these concrete jungles. But if you are in one of those places, I remember being in the shanty towns in Africa and finding so many beautiful people. And it was so incredible for me to see the kindness and the generosity of spirit and the communities that existed within what appeared to be a mishmash of mess and falling down corrugated iron mess. The communities that existed within that level of poverty were so incredibly beautiful. And the children that are coming out with their gleaming white school uniforms on, this is the same in Bali, they live in very poor circumstances. They don't have a fridge and they don't have a bed. They live in dusty places and they roll a mat out and they sleep on the floor. But they sweep it every morning and they're very proud of their space and they keep it very clean and beautiful. And coexisting alongside these people in Indonesia, it brings a whole nother aspect to talking about beauty. And they'll present their children every morning in their perfectly immaculate white school uniforms out of the dusty, dirty houses that they're in. And the kids are happy and connected to each other, and the communities within those places are pretty incredible.
You've packed loads into there, and I've just been making notes while you were talking, and there's three things I think in particular. So first, there's something about beauty and relativity. So when you've got something that stands out against this backdrop of kind of stuff that's it doesn't look very nice, it can, maybe it's not beautiful in another setting, but in that setting, it absolutely is, because it stands out from the crowd in a positive way. So there's something about relativity being involved. Familiarity as well. So I was brought up in a city in the southwest of England, so Plymouth, in Devon, and we were very close to the sea, which I love the sea, but I hardly ever went to see the sea, even though it was right there on my doorstep. And so there's something about your appreciation of beauty can be dimmed or dulled if you see it all the time. I remember visiting it's happened again. Around about 10 years ago, I was running an event for a client at a hotel on Loch Lomond. And at the end of the event, I got a ride from the guy, the concierge, to the airport. And as we were driving out of the property along the side of the lock, he said, I feel like the luckiest person in the world to work here. And this is my journey every day. And the difference is that he appreciated it every day rather than kind of just got used to it and thought of it as the norm. So there's something about the risk of familiarity getting in the way of beauty, and the need to remind ourselves, like your sunset, it's like, don't just let it happen there and kind of take it for granted. Get involved with it and recognize that the sun is going down today and that's the end of the day. There's something about interaction in order to get the most out of beauty. And then difference. I've written down difference because I enjoy photography. And I remember being in places like, well, two examples I can think of. One being in Japan, where in Tokyo, I just thought that it was beautiful to have all of these kind of signs that I didn't understand at all. But visually, found it really appealing and beautiful, but I didn't know what they meant. It could have said, maybe it said, we'll collect your rubbish on Wednesdays. Now, is that beautiful? And I remember another one. I remember taking a photograph of 4 people waiting at a bus stop in Moscow against a shop hoarding in the background with some writing on, but of course, again, don't understand the alphabet. And that to me was beautiful, but it was because, and it was you talking about the paddy field farmers that made me think about this, because again, I would probably think, oh, well, that's a great shot. But they're like, well, my feet are hurting and I've been working for 10 hours. And so I'm just wanting to go home. So what's that?
They're not looking at the view, thinking it looks amazing. They're trying to not get bitten by the snakes. Yeah. And, worrying about if they're going to have enough money, if the crop fails, they're consumed with that stuff. They're not consumed because they have a very accepting, their belief system allows them to be super accepting of whatever is, because, in Indonesian, they don't have a future or a past tense. They only have a present tense. So it focuses them on the present moment in the most exquisite, extraordinary way. And, I love being in Bali and living there brings that out in you, that you have to live in the present moment in that country. You can't survive otherwise. You'll be wiped off your motorbike or something. You are, your sense of consciousness is heightened, I think. And I think this is probably what we're talking about with beauty. It's a consciousness and an awareness of different layers that are in there. Yeah. And an exercise that I sometimes take students through, or anyone really that might come and have a consult with me if they're struggling with something, is about expanding their perspective, which is expanding their consciousness. Because that's the only reason that we create judgment on whether something's good, bad, right, wrong, beautiful, ugly, is because of a lopsided perspective within our consciousness. And living in the balance of the quantum world that we do, everything is just as it is. Everything is always perfect, perfectly imperfect, really. And this is an interesting thing to sort of apply beauty to, that, you think about art, and there's so many forms of art, and some people might find one thing beautiful and people find it, that's why we have so many different forms and genres, I suppose, of art, because some art is quite jarring and disturbing. Yeah. And its purpose is different to being visually, aesthetically calm and pleasing. But there's something beautiful because of what's being created in that space.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
It does. It does. I just want to go back to Bali. That's true. So,
don't we all?
I spent 5 weeks in Bali and Lombok a long time ago, but I relate exactly to what you just. I didn't know that about them not having a past and a future and just the present. But I remember the first day arriving in Bali and going to the little shop to get some water, bottles of water. And so went and got the bottles, took them to the the till, and I was stood there, and the lady at the till just looked at me and she said, "Have you just arrived?" So I said, "Yeah," and I had the money in my hand, and she said, "Well, you're in Bali, you can relax now." And I just went, "Shh." Yeah. And then the other memory I have, loads of memories from there, but the other one that relates to this conversation about the moment, we spent some time on Lombok, and there was only one hotel on Lombok at that time. I don't know how many there are now. I'm guessing that there's a load more.
There's hundreds, yeah.
And the ferry on the way back, we had kind of misjudged the timing somehow. Anyway, we were going to miss the ferry and they weren't that regular. So we decided to just leave the hire car and get on the ferry. And when we got to the other side, I went to the office and I was dreading, that what was going to happen. And I said, "Look, I'm really sorry about this, but we made a decision that we needed to catch the ferry because else the next one is whenever it was. I'm really sorry, the car's on the other side." And the guy just went, "Okay." It was just like, no big deal. Thanks for letting me know. And and that was actually a beautiful way to deal with a situation that I was totally stressed about.
It's a beautiful attitude to life they have, and their day is punctured with their offerings. They mark the day at dawn at 6 a.m., 12 and 6 p.m. And the temples in all the banjars in all the regions in Bali mark those 3 times of the day with music, and it brings people back into the moment, and they spend that moment in gratitude and whatever else, depending on the season and the moon and all the other things that come into play in their belief system. They have focus and time out of their busy day to come and just pay attention and put their energy into that moment. Yeah. And there's something really profoundly powerful in that ritual that happens on a regular basis through every single day. And there's weekly rituals and there's monthly rituals, that follow the moon. So there's a lot of ritual and ceremony in the Balinese culture, it's beautiful that it's been so preserved in the way that it has. For as a Westerner to come in and see that and to observe how that impacts their communities and the Balinese as people. And there's such a beautiful acceptance of life being as it is. And you're right, that level of stress just dissipates.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean they float around on a cloud. They don't. I have plenty of Balinese friends who feel stressed out by certain things, and mostly because the Western people have come in and brought their standards and their expectations into the country, into their world and their way of doing things. And so for them to have to keep up with that in order to generate an income definitely generates stress for them.
And it reminds me of, again, Japanese cultures. And there's something about Eastern culture that I find myself drawn to more than Western culture. So in Japan, there is a hospitality concept called omotenashi. So the literal translation of the word omotenashi is hospitality, but it was described to me by a Japanese person as taking personal pleasure from paying attention to fine detail in delivering a service. That's how it was described. And I describe that description as beautiful, and I get a tingle when I say it. And just as an example, I remember going into a not expensive tea shop, and when the tea was brought to the table, the lady who brought the tray with the pots and the cups and everything, she put the stuff down on the table. But then before she left, she just made sure that the teaspoon was parallel to the handle of the cup. And then she moved the sugar bowl like 2 centimeters closer so that you could, it was easier for you. And I created some training material around that, actually. So it's called Heartfelt Hospitality. And part of that is about how you tune in to the other person. It's what you were saying earlier about, consciously recognizing where you are, what your environment is, who's around you. And one of the core concepts of omotenashi is to remember that this service moment between two people will never, ever be repeated in exactly the same way, because the circumstances will be different, or the mood of one person or the other might be different. So on that basis, just make it the very best that you can.
That's exquisitely beautiful.
The
tea ceremony, it's almost like there's a lot of honor around that.
Yeah.
And it's been so beautifully preserved. The tradition around the tea ceremony is very special, and it is beautiful. It's a thing of beauty.
Yeah.
And that's why I think beauty is so essential in our world. It provides deep joy and pleasure, and it will look completely different to each of us.
Do you know, I think that's a brilliant wrap in terms of our conversation today, to move us to the final question. And this is the final question. What are you encouraged to do differently about beauty as a result of our conversation?
Oh, I was thinking about this before, how I feel. I love this. It's not a word that I would have ever thought to really dig into. So I love this. It's made me want to be even more observant about the beauty that's around me and get into the state of mind. It reminds me of, actually, I used to have an Instagram called Paradise is a State of Mind. And that kind of flashed into my mind earlier as well. Paradise is a state of mind. It's like beauty is a state of mind. It's the same thing. And I used to put all sorts of nice little quotes and things, and then I don't know, it all became another thing to do. But yeah, beauty is a state of mind. So consciously choosing to see beauty around me, it'll make me be more present. And I think that can only be a good thing. And it will expand my consciousness. And I think it is one of the steps to lead us into gratitude and appreciation, is Absolutely. To notice the beauty.
Yeah.
And
all right. So
I was just going to say, it's part of a beautiful heart math meditation that I did once, where you did a breathing thing and then you remembered a beautiful memory and how that made you feel.
Okay.
It was the stepping stone to being in a state of gratitude. So beauty was almost like the doorway to gratitude, to really feeling that gratitude and being in that state. So maybe beauty is that it's like the key to gratitude and appreciation. And
you're coming up with some brilliant quotes here,
I know it's just kind of dropping in now, but it's like, what's the purpose of beauty? Because I think sometimes we think, oh, we're focusing on superficial beauty and we're obsessed by what we look like, or, you know, if, you know, and the judgment and all that sort of stuff. I think we tend to sort of beat ourselves up a little bit that we might be being vain or focusing on the wrong things. And, you know, and I've got photos of rice farmers in Bali with one tooth. And I think that they're exquisitely beautiful photographs, you know, but focusing on the physical, is that a bad thing? I think it's part of who we are. So we shouldn't exclude it and not include it in part of the whole beautiful equation. So yeah, I'm definitely going to take more time to notice and expand my perspective.
So let me help you make that a bit more concrete now, because sometimes when we say things like you just said, we don't actually do anything about it. So can you think of a small baby step that you can say, right, in order to move towards what I've just described, this is what I'm going to do with whoever, whenever?
Mm-hmm. Well, the Japanese example you gave of the tea ceremony was great, and the hospitality. I haven't heard of that Japanese word, so I'm going to go and investigate further because it's fascinating. The Japanese have got such beautiful words to describe things that don't even exist in our Western culture. So I think stopping to taste every mouthful that you're eating.
Your chicken soup.
Yes, my chicken soup that's bubbling away in my kitchen. You know, it has star anise and it has cloves and it has 6 black peppercorns were in the recipe for this chicken soup. And as I'm thinking 6 black peppercorns, why is it 6? Why is it not 20 or 2? So I think it's a slowing down to be able to take time to see the beauty, and whether that's how you clean your teeth or how you eat your soup. And I like to embed these things, you know, these lovely ideals that we have that we're going to do. If we can embed them in the rituals that we do each day,
yeah,
like cleaning our teeth, it builds a new little habit into our life.
Yeah, well, you're preaching to the converted, because 31 practices is absolutely about that. And as a result of our conversation today, I think I'm going to, it's similar to yours in that I'm going to be more tuned in and more consciously aware. But in order to make a start on that, actually, I got sent a present by somebody earlier this year. So it's 1,001 paintings.
Oh, book.
And yeah, so I'm going to spend 15 minutes just flicking through this and identifying some works of art that I consider to be really beautiful. So I'm going to enjoy doing that today as a result of our conversation. So Sally, thank you so much for joining me for this Values Jam and exploring this topic of beauty, which is it's revealed some brilliant surprise, some beautiful surprises, actually. So thank you so much.
Oh, no, Alan, thank you. Honestly, it has been truly beautiful experience to firstly, I've met you and had the conversations that we've had, and I hope there are many, many more of these beautiful conversations. Thank you so much. Thank you for all you're doing in the world and what you bring, the beautiful gifts that you have created and offering into the world now. And it's a joy to be part of this with you. Thank you so much.
Cheers.